What's up, everyone? Today we're going to compare my normal everyday tool set to this tool set off Amazon and some cheap tools that I found at the hardware store. These are the tools that I use almost every day. This is an inexpensive tool set off of Amazon. There's a lot of them like this. And these are three tools that I picked up in local hardware stores. The scissor, in case you're not familiar, is your basic bonsai tool for trimming branches, small twigs, leaves, all of those sorts of things. This is going to be the tool that you pick up almost every time that you do bonsai. These are wire cutters. They're made in Japan. They're a high quality tool with a cutting edge that goes all the way to the tip right here, and that's so that you can both cut wire off a spool and cut it off the branch easily without damaging the plant. A larger wire cutter is necessary sometimes for large gauge wires. These are actually a small bolt cutter from a company called Knipex and very useful. This is a standard bonsai branch cutter. It has a curved cutting surface, either in just one plane or two spherical, and these are used for removing larger branches and making pruning cuts. Generally speaking, very different results than you get from a bypass pruner that you would normally see in a garden. Pliers are super useful in bonsai. You're going to use them almost as much as your scissors, either for taking on and off wire, breaking wood, all of those sorts of things. Definitely a must-have. A pair of tweezers, either bent nose or straight, is good for raking through soil. It's also good for picking off weeds. This is a standard bonsai bent nose tweezer, relatively inexpensive. This set and a bunch of other sets like them off Amazon are what come up when they search for bonsai toolkit. There's a lot of tools in here that are not super useful. Let's take a look at this kit. So let's start with these scissors. To the naked eye, or to my eye at least, these are probably the best looking tool in here. They look very similar to the scissors that I use every day when you really just look at them on the surface. But when you look a little bit closer, see, this one has nice movement to it. All of the metal is very smooth. So like right here, for example, any sharp edges of this are you're not able to even get my fingernail in there. Whereas on this one, there's a sharp burr of metal right here that would actually potentially cut you. Obviously, this part of the tool is meant for cutting, but there are some sharp edges where they shouldn't be over here. When I pick these up and I go to use them, they actually stick when I try to open and close them. Somewhere on either one of these sides, there's a bump. And so when you come to that bump, they kind of stall out and then they jump past it. Obviously, just not a good quality tool, and if only for the rough metal edges right here. Some of the other tools in the set are actually almost laughable. And not only do you not need them, you probably, if you're not a bonsai practitioner who's been working for a while, you're probably not even sure what they're for. This is an interesting example of a tool that it potentially could be useful. It's basically just another pair of scissors, but it's very small, and these are generally used for leaf pruning. But I have to say, in 20 years of doing bonsai, I've never used one of these. I always just use a regular pair of scissors, like I showed you a second ago, right here in front of me. The advantage of this versus this, there's no real advantage to this in my mind, and for whatever reason, there are two of those in here. I don't know if they intend you to do like an Edward Scissorhands kind of thing, like whack, 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 whack. There's something about miniature shovels and miniature rakes that seems to appeal to people. I'm not sure exactly what you would use this for. One of the things you would use a three-prong rake for, which is a standard bonsai tool, is for raking roots, raking across the bottom of a root ball during the repotting process. If this is going to pop off like this, then you're not really going to be very successful with doing that, because every time you rake across the bottom, it would potentially pop off. My thought is that this is probably sold because people think that they might be raking the gravel on top of their tree. Not really sure what purpose this serves, raking gravel across the surface of my tree. Anyway, if you like doing that, or maybe if you had, instead of regular bonsai soil, if you had like a container with sand in it, you could make some pretty interesting grooves. That's really more of a, I don't even know what to call it. It's not bonsai. Other than the fact that this is really small for my hand, which would make it harder to grip when I'm raking like this. It actually seems like it's a reasonably functional tool. It would not be particularly comfortable because the stamped steel edge here, it's not going to be fun for you to like push that into root balls in order to rake out roots and kind of help with the repotting process and re-aerating your soil. A pair of garden loppers is not usually what we use for bonsai. It's all plastic construction. This spring is obviously going to just come right out. I would recommend that you spend a little bit more money, and if you want this type of pruner, to actually buy a branded one that you know will last you for a while. I actually don't think this is a very functional case from a bonsai perspective. I prefer just like a simple small tool bag, either like an electrician's bag or just a simple pouch to put a few tools in if I'm looking to carry around something this size, as well as all of these Velcro straps that are in here just make it harder to use in my mind. An inexpensive alternative to the kits off Amazon is to just buy a few simple tools like this, either also online or at local hardware stores. This is a slip joint plier, relatively inexpensive. This is an electrician scissors, and these are an angled wire nip. Let's take a look at comparing these three sets of tools and how they work in certain operations. So here's our wire cutting test. I've got a larger piece of aluminum here that's really easy to cut with these guys. A small 17 gauge steel, also easy to cut with these. A number 20 copper, relatively easy, no issues. This looks like about a 14 or 16 copper, no issues. This is a number 4 gauge copper. It's doable with these, but very difficult to cut through that. For the large gauge, typically I would use these Nipex, which go straight through the copper. A little bit easier than the standard wire cutters. They also work reasonably well for small gauge wire, have a good cutting surface, aluminum, as well as steel. But one thing about the Nipex is that if you look right here at the tip, there's a little indentation, and that means that they're not quite as good for cutting small wire, particularly when you're removing it from the branch. This set leaves you kind of high and dry in terms of wire cutting. You could certainly use a pair of scissors to wire cut, although these scissors, as we discussed, are not really great. And even though the set includes some wire, there's really no way for you to do wire work, and there's also no pliers in here. Here's an example of another wire cutter that I found on Amazon, and to first impressions, it actually looks really good. It almost looks identical to the tool that I use on a regular basis shape-wise, but when you go to use it, it actually does okay cutting some wire, but not others. So rather than actually cutting the wire, it just sort of smashes it and leaves it attached. And that's because this part of the cutting surface is flat rather than coming to a point that usually indicates that the metal that's here is not quite as strong as what's being used in higher quality tools. In our alternative kit, there's these three items: a pair of slip joint pliers, a bent tip wire nip from Craftsman. These I got off Amazon, and they are Channel Lock brand. And the interesting thing that you can't really notice just looking at the picture is that one of the sides of the cutting surface here is serrated with a very fine serration. The interesting thing about that is that it prevents things from slipping down the jaw of the scissor. Now, this is not really meant for cutting through wire. So if I try to cut through this small copper gauge here at the tip, it's not really doing the job. But if I bring it back here and kind of choke up a little bit, it'll actually go through it. It goes through, let's see, medium grade aluminum, and doesn't really cut through steel. So would be a particularly, kind of like a scissor or small style wire cutter, you could still use this. And for the larger gauges, this guy is going to be more useful. because it's actually designed for cutting wire. Let's test this on the number 4 and see how we do. Yeah, so that requires a lot of hand strength, and actually I'm not even really going through it. The other thing I noticed about this, and it's still a usable tool, but there is this gap here at the edge. So if you take a wire and you stick it all the way down to the bottom and try to cut it, it doesn't actually cut it, which ideally that gap wouldn't be there, so that you don't have to think about where on the cutter you're putting the wire. Still, for a $10 tool, it's relatively good and good quality metal and machining on the matching surfaces here. When it comes to pliers, I find that these are pretty much just as useful, if not slightly better than standard bonsai pliers. However, in one operation, which is stripping off bark from branches, it doesn't smash down the bark quite as well as the gin pliers do. So definitely a good and cheaper alternative to a $40 plier in this $10 package. So let's test out some of the tools on this ficus tree. This is my regular scissor, and there's not really any problem with getting in here into tight spaces with these types of scissors. That's why I really like them. But let's take a look at a couple other types of scissors. The ARS grape scissors that we sell on Bonsaify.com are basically the $20 version of the same tool, although they look a little bit different and the handle is plastic. But these are really meant for light trimming, and so you wouldn't be wanting to use a pair of scissors like this to try to cut off larger branches, because you might end up damaging them. Although I have done some pretty significant things and not had anything ever go wrong with this. Our inexpensive alternative to the scissors is this $15 pair of electrician scissors, and I have used this a couple times already to snip various things. I think the only issue that I have, and it might be because my fingers are a little bit bigger, is that on this particular pair, these loops are a little smaller than I would like. But I can snip through branches, I can snip through leaves, I can shape leaves, and everything feels really solid, and it doesn't feel like these are going to dull really quickly. And in fact, I'm going to test out a little bit larger branch cut here, and that does a relatively good job without any real issue. Now, a standard branch cutter like this is used to remove larger branches. If I wanted to come in and say remove some portion of this, I would usually use this tool. When you're cutting larger pieces of wood, sometimes you don't use scissors just because you're concerned about potentially damaging the scissors. But if I were going to recommend how you work on a bonsai tree without a pair of branch cutters, I would say this pair of wire nips from Craftsman, or a similar pair of bent tip wire nips, is probably going to do a pretty good job. So let's give it a test. You know, it's a relatively clean cut. I could imagine that the cut that you would get from a bypass pruner might be a little bit cleaner, less damage to the tissue that's remaining right next to the cut, but you could certainly get away with using this inexpensive tool for bonsai pruning various sizes of branches. And finally, these channel lock pliers work perfectly well, as I've already demonstrated. So that's it. My top recommendation for tools is a set like this. We sell these on Bonsaify.com. Avoid kits like this on Amazon, especially if you're not familiar with tools, due to quality issues, as well as just a bunch of tools that you don't really need. And if you're looking for a basic, I want to get bonsai done, but I don't want to spend a lot of money type of kit, consider picking up just these 3 tools. If you found this video useful, check out some of our other videos. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.